Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, COVID-19 from Surviving to Thriving with Helen Lowry. Today you are listening using your computer speaker system by default. You'll have the opportunity to submit questions to Helen by typing them into the questions pane on the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. Helen will address them during the presentation. Helen is a speaker, counsellor, pharmacist, project manager, and change manager. Helen is passionate about working with diverse stakeholders to enhance leadership and teamwork through contemporary challenges. Helen has recently presented webinars on resilience, growing from adversity in the context of bushfires, and COVID-19 from surviving to thriving. Helen looks forward to working with you to ensure your employees feel engaged, innovative, productive, and resilient to deliver best outcomes during the COVID-19 pandemic. I will now hand this over to Helen.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me. Just a quick check-in. Can you hear me? Hopefully, yes. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Just do a quick time check. Okay, I'm going to continue. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. So I would like to welcome you and acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today. I wish to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be here today. I also wish to thank APPA for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. Thank you. So just to give you a bit of an overview, my talk today is on how we shift from surviving to thriving during unprecedented uncertainty. So there'll be three main sections to this webinar. The first will be about leading through crisis, and the middle part will be about creating resilient, high-performing teams, and finally we'll wrap up with some self-care tips. All right, so the image on the right-hand side is my metaphor for COVID-19 and the pandemic. We know that it's left a bit of a path of destruction. It's caused morbidity, there's even been deaths, and to some certain extent, it's been a little bit uncertain. There's not many of us that have actually gone through a pandemic, and so we're still a little bit uncertain as to how it's going to impact ourselves, our families, our communities, and our businesses. So this is my neuroscience slide. There's just the one slide, but I think it's helpful at the outset just to explain a little bit about what's going on in the brain at this time, because that will help us to understand how we can shift to a place where we're thriving. So the amygdala is the part of the brain that looks for risks and threats in our community. So it's pretty much switched on at the moment when we're aware that there is a risk out there with COVID-19. So what the amygdala does, it triggers what we sometimes call the fight, flight, freeze response. And that happens a fraction of a second before our more evolved part of the brain kicks in, which is the prefrontal cortex. So it's pretty much impossible to think rationally when we're in that fight, flight, freeze place. It causes the release of adrenaline and cortisol as well. So the way that we might experience that is perhaps at night time, we might wake up at 3 in the morning and start doing some problem solving. Or it might be that we just feel a little bit hypervigilant all of the time. So we're on alert for risks and threats, and just feeling that sense of uneasiness. Or we might notice that others around us, our stakeholders, our employees, even our managers, might be feeling a little bit brittle and reactive. And perhaps even defensive behaviours creeping in, because this is a little bit unusual these times. We've not encountered them before. So it can impact us in many ways. But what we want to do is to shift from that survival mode to a place where we feel that we can thrive, adapt, evolve, and rise to the challenges. So our prefrontal cortex is responsible for complex thinking, problem solving, and behaviour regulation. So a lot of us are having to do things in a different way, and I think doing webinars is something that I'm still adjusting to. But learning new things, complex thinking, we're solving challenges and new ways of learning and doing things differently. And that actually takes a lot more energy. So the amygdala is a primitive part of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex it's more evolved in terms of our evolution. It's a more evolved way of working. So our hippocampus is a part of the brain. It's a little bit like a library in the brain. It's where we store information. So when we come across a pandemic, we kind of go to that library and we think, where's that dummy's guide on how to do a pandemic, or where can I find the blueprint of how to do this? And as I say, many of us haven't experienced something like that before. So that in itself can make us feel a bit uneasy. So it's helpful to have that basic understanding of neuroscience of what's going on in our brain, because we can actually do things to help us shift from surviving to thriving. Another thing I'll be talking about through the presentation is psychological safety. That at the moment, we tend not to have physical threats like we used to do many, many years ago. So what we still are sensitive to are the sort of psychological threats. So if we experiencing an offhand remark or a belittling, demeaning comment, our brains actually react and respond to that in the same way as if we were threatened physically. So it's worthwhile mentioning that, so that we understand how we need to work together during these difficult times. So I mentioned psychological safety, and it was first described by Kahn in 1990. And that description was it's being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status, or career. Now, as human beings, we're actually really concerned about how we come across to people. We're very involved with our status. That's whoever we are. So when we're talking to people, often we'll think first about how we might be perceived. You know, will that person be impressed with what I'm going to say? Or is this a question that's going to make me look stupid? So we're often thinking about those things, and that can determine how we interact at work and in our businesses. So Amy Edmondson is probably one of the better known people for talking about psychological safety. She described it as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And I'll come on to that. So what I'm going to try, this is a bit of an experiment, but I'm going to go onto this link here. And what I'd like you to do whilst this is loading is reach for your mobile phone or an electronic device. So hopefully this is an interactive activity that we can do together. So if you go into the browser of your mobile phone, or if you've got an iPad with you, go into the browser and type www.menti.com, and that's on the top of the screen just for reference. And then it'll ask you to use the code 588085. And so when you've done that, it'll ask you some questions. And what I want to ask you is, if you think of a manager or a team where you have felt safe, can you perhaps describe 3 things that helped you to feel safe in that setting? So I'm just looking, we've got 11 participants. So what should happen as we do that is, in the bottom right-hand corner, I'll start to see a number of people have hopped on, have been able to do that, and we should get a word cloud. As I say, it's a bit experimental, so we'll just see how we go. If it's not working, that's easy enough. I can just keep moving. So we've got 11 participants. So as I say, just to refresh, the instructions are to type in www.menti.com and use the code 588085, and then start typing in 508085, and then start typing in your words. So whilst you're doing that, I've got one person that's been able to do that. I'm just going to have a quick look at the Q&A to see whether we've got and participants. I can't see. I've got a raised hand from an attendee. We've got some more words coming in, so we've got 2 people now engaging in this. I'm happy if we've only got a small number of participants, so if anybody wants to speak now, I'm happy to answer quick questions about psychological safety and what I've just covered so far. So just give a moment for people to come off mute. So look, I'm not able to access the Q&A right now, so I'm going to stop share in a minute. Oh, we've got 3 now. We've got 3 participants. So I'm not sure whether you can see the screen, but I'm going to read it out to you and just let you know that the feedback that I'm receiving is that people feel that compassion is important, that security is important, that people need a sense of guidance, support, caring, family is important, and trust is important. Being busy as well, that's interesting. People like to feel that they're occupied. We've got some more coming in. Good income, yes. Financial security is important at this time. So in the interest of time, I might keep moving, but if you want to keep putting your suggestions in that box, feel free to do so, because what I can do at the end of the presentation is actually forward that slide to you. The responses are anonymous.
Helen, this is Ida. I've just read through some of the questions. We've just had 2 participants just wanting the code again. If you can just read that out again, please.
Yeah, the code is 588085, and that's coming up at the top of the screen. If people can you see that screen, Ida?
No.
Okay, so so people have got the code, they've got the menti.com. So as I say, people can continue doing that in the background, and I'll just stop the share on that screen and escape and go back to the presentation. So, okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, and that's about leadership. So what I'm reading in the literature is that this time is actually asking us to look at a different style of leadership. So from command and control to compassion. So I guess I just want to ask you really whether you think that you have a directive style of leadership or whether you lead with compassion. And when I talk about compassion, what I mean is, do you have a sense of empathy for the team that you're working with, your customers, your stakeholders, your shareholders? Are you tuning in right now to what's going on for them in terms of what they're thinking, what they're feeling? Because that's kind of helpful in terms of the way you're interacting. And it was great to receive some feedback from people in the audience about the things that they value as well. So transparency is important. It might be that your bottom line at the moment is not traveling so well. You might have a reduced number of orders, and I'm not entirely sure what different types of businesses are that you have, but transparency is really important to help people make informed decisions. So, for example, one of the areas that I work in is pharmacy, and community pharmacies are being hit quite hard at the moment by COVID-19. But if you are transparent about how well your company is travelling, it might be that some of your employees are actually happy to take a little bit of time off or have reduced hours in order to balance that work-life balance and look after people at home. But they can only make those sorts of decisions as a group if they're transparent and there's information available to how things are going. So you can make changes, and at least your business might still be able to thrive during these times by making some changes like that, so that people do have work to come back to at the other side of this. So engage and empower the team. So these are some ways in which we can do that. I think it's reminding people that we are in uncharted territory, and therefore managers and leaders don't necessarily have all the answers, and this is a time where it's okay to actually accept that, and invite and expect responses from your teams about, I'm going to need your input from all of you, and there's nothing that says I respect you more than if you actually ask your team what their thoughts are, what their ideas are, what their suggestions are, and follow it up. Well, what does that look like, and what would the next steps be? So recognition and reward. So you could say, whilst the amygdala is looking for threats, there's a part of the brain that's also looking for reward. And so when we reward people and acknowledge good work, that actually impacts the brain in a way to motivate and inspire people. So a question, and this is just for your own reflection, is do you lead to control? Are you somebody that likes everything to be very much in your control, or do you lead to inspire? So perhaps have a bit of a reflection on that after this session. So teaming through unprecedented certainty. So talking more about a team. I'm sure everybody's heard of Google. Now, Google did a project over a couple of years, and it was called Project Aristotle. They looked at 180 different teams and 250 different parameters. And what they were looking for was, what are the conditions that make a high-performing team? Now, with a company like Google, you might think, well, is it their qualifications? Is it their experience of managing huge projects like this before? The answers were somewhat surprising. They found that the teams that were the most effective were the teams where they felt psychologically safe. So those were the teams where they felt safe to speak up when, for example, when things didn't go quite so well, they felt it was okay to talk about that and say, you know what, this idea, this project, it's not traveling as I had thought it would. And what are your ideas? What can we do to turn this around? Or it might be safety to talk about mistakes, or it might be safety to challenge the team leader and say, you know, I'm just not sure that we're tracking where we need to be, and perhaps if we can turn this around. So people felt safe to speak up, and people felt safe to share things when things were working well, but also they were able to learn when things weren't traveling so well. So the other things on this list are things like dependability. So that's where teams get things done on time and meet the expectations, and it's about trust as well. Doing things that you say you're going to do. People feel, especially in uncertain times like we're working in at the moment, that people feel a need to feel an anchor or a sense of security. So if you can have an element of your work practices that are consistent and reliable, that means people can do those things without engaging too much energy, and they can conserve some energy for being innovative. So number 3 on this list is structure and clarity. So, excuse me, teams need to feel that they have clarity about what's expected of them. You know, what are their roles? What are their goals? What are their plans? Where are you heading? If you don't have a roadmap, it's really hard to understand how to get to the destination. So making that clear for your teams and for your employees is really important. And meaning and impact. I've learned from experts in the sales space that commission and financial incentives, they might bring about a motivation in a short term, but in the long term, it's people feeling that they have meaning and impact through the work that they're doing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. So decision making is the next topic I'd like to talk to you about. Now, it's never easy to make good decisions quickly, especially in uncertain circumstances, which is something that we're moving through right now. So we're still a little bit uncertain as to the restrictions and how they're going to be lifted and how that's going to pan out over the next 3 months. So there's still uncertainty out there. So what we need is leaders and teams that are able to challenge each other and to be able to put options under the spotlight before a choice is made. Research shows that people feeling safe to communicate openly and share knowledge is going to help us to thrive, adapt, and evolve during these times. So blame should be replaced by curiosity, because that's what's going to make people feel safe. And just to give you a little story about this, I'm going to share something about Pixar. Now, Pixar's co-founder, Ed Cattrall, he has a team and he calls them the Brain Trust. Now, if you think about Pixar, I think many of you have seen some of their movies or heard of them at least. They've been able to have blockbuster hit after blockbuster hit. There's about 19 in all successful movies that they've released. So that's quite an outstanding track record in the industry. And the co-founder attributes that to this brain trust. And what he would do is he would take them out for lunch, and in the afternoon they would sit around and watch a movie. Now, it was said internally that most of the movies that they make are actually quite ordinary to start off with. So it's through this process of team review, team analysis, and team critique that transforms those quite ordinary movies into something that's outstanding. Now, there are 3 ground rules that they have for those sessions. And one is that any comments need to be constructive. So this isn't an opportunity to critique their colleagues. It's an opportunity to look at the product. What's the product and how is that product going to serve the public? The second ground rule is making sure that people have the understanding that these ideas are suggestions only, and they understand clearly that it's the director, the movie director, that has the final say. So there's clarity around the decision-making process and who is going to make the final decision. The third ground rule is to ensure that people come from a place that's positive when they're making these comments. So this isn't a gotcha moment where people sort of pick out things that are furphies that are not going quite so well. This is an opportunity for people to really come from a place of compassion and good intention, that they're working to make sure that the movie hits the right spot and has the right outcome. So again, just a question about how do you make decisions? Is it a collaborative process or is it top down? And I might stop for a moment and see if we can just have a look at what people are saying in terms of questions. Now, I can't actually see a chat box. I'm going to have a look at the, right, at least I can hear people now. It's great. I'm not just talking to a screen. I can say, yes, I can hear you loud and clear. What's the code? And my connection's scratchy. Okay, so I haven't got any new questions related to this, but what I was asking people is, how do you make decisions? Are they top down? Are they collaborative? How do you engage your teams? So I'll have a look at the Q&A box again towards the end of the session. So. Okay. My next slide is innovation. So COVID-19 will present challenges and opportunities, and I think it's important that we do realise we can't always control what happens to us, so nobody had much control over COVID-19, but what we can control is how we react and respond to that. So as I say, from my own perspective, I've never been busier in terms of webinars and podcasts, and that's about looking at the opportunity and understanding that people do need some help and support right now in terms of resilience and health and well-being, which is another area that I tend to focus on and specialise in. So these challenges can demand new ideas at both macro and micro level in the way that we work. Again, psychological safety has a key role to play there, and there's a strong relationship between innovation and psychological safety in normal times. So imagine what that does in a pandemic. So again, my question, just to encourage some reflection, is how do you create respect and provide permission for innovation? So again, just to give you another story to illustrate that, in Victoria we have a gin distillery called 4 Pillars. Great drop of gin, by the way. And imagine if they had a board meeting, and obviously people are buying less, although online sales are still continuing. So imagine at a board meeting, you've got your employees sitting around the table. Imagine if one says, look, business isn't so great at the moment, but how about we use one of our strengths, that's the alcohol base of the products that we produce, and we consider making some hand sanitizer. Now, as we all know, hand sanitizer has been in short supply and it hasn't met the demand. So there was a gap there in the market where people could potentially step in. So the board of 4 Pillars could have gone to one of 2 ways. One, it could have said, look, we're gin distilleries. We're a gin distillery. this is what we've always done, and this is what we're always going to do. We're going to make gin, and that's it. And that idea is so ridiculous. Don't bother us anymore with silly ideas like that. Now, if they'd reacted and responded like that, there would have been an opportunity missed. If, however, the board said, well, that's a really good observation. There's an opportunity out there, and we already work with ethanol, and that is a key constituent in the hand sanitizer. And so we're already ahead of the market in terms of being able to adapt, evolve, and respond to that need. And so fortunately, there's quite a few distilleries. 4 Pillars don't commercially supply hand sanitizer, but there are other distilleries that have done, and they've met that need to have an 80% alcohol content in hand sanitizer. So that's just an example of, people can adapt and evolve during these times, and perhaps by doing that, actually had an alternative stream of income, which could keep businesses alive and thriving at a difficult time. But a lot of it would go down to what those conversations would be with the co-founders, the CEOs, the board, the managers, and how they react and respond to people from across the organisation. So the other side of innovation is risk. So we need to spot the cracks early. We need to be aware and alert to when things may not go so well. So we're operating in an uncharted territory here, and it's essential that people feel safe to speak up. And the example is VW, that I'm just going to illustrate that point. Now, it's understood that the CEO of VW was quite a tyrant. He led with a reign of terror. He led with a sense of fear and intimidation. So it was once reported that he brought his employees into a boardroom and told them that if they didn't meet certain targets, then he had their names and addresses, and he could replace them all within 2 weeks if they didn't meet the targets. So imagine what a culture that would create in the organisation. So when it came to producing a vehicle that had a diesel engine, and they were trying to produce an engine that it met the EPA emission targets for nitrous oxide, and it also performed well so that the customers were happy. Well, nobody felt safe to tell the managing directors and the executive team that this couldn't be achieved. And so what actually happened was during the testing, they had 2 of the car wheels running instead of 4, so that they would actually get the emissions targets that they were aiming for. They also had software which was designed to ensure that the emissions targets in the exhaust met the requirements in the lab, but when the vehicle was on the road and being tested in real life conditions, that switched off, it cut out, because we needed to ensure that there was good performance for customer satisfaction. So there's a few glitches in the design, and to conceal some of the shortfalls. What happened was the emissions were actually 40 times greater than what they're allowed to be from the EPA regulations. And this was discovered, and of course, without meaning to have a pun, that backfired big time on VW and their reputation. So Amy Edmondson, on her book, Fearless Organisations, talks about how important it is in an organisation that people feel safe to speak up when targets can be reached and when there are cracks. So agility, as we've already understood from those 2 previous slides, not everything is going to go right. And, that's okay, so long as people have access to quick feedback and the willingness to accept it, learn and adapt. So, it'd be interesting to know and reflect on your own systems and processes. We all know, I'm sure we've all experienced times when feedback was quite humiliating, belittling and demeaning, and really that causes us to retreat into our shell rather than thrive and grow. Whereas, again, I hope all of us can reflect on those managers that were more nurturing I remember one manager, when I used to work at the Royal Children's Hospital in Liverpool, I used to go into his office with one idea and I'd come out with 10. He was so motivating and inspiring. And it's those great leaders and managers that you reflect on for the rest of your career. So what's the feedback process like? And is that constructive? And do your employees learn and grow from it? Because that's going to help you be adaptive and agile at these times. So on to leading with purpose, and this ties into the slide that I mentioned earlier about Google's Aristotle project and how much you can get an extra bit of discretionary effort out of people. So I read an article recently by McKinsey and Company. They talked about how the research tells us that customers are boycotting companies whose values are contrary to their own. Investors are migrating to companies where there's environmental, societal and governance thinking that aligns to their own values. And employees feel more engaged when companies have a positive impact on the world. And we know through COVID-19, it's been unprecedented in how the whole community, and I think, you know, there's never been a more proud time to be even an Australian and living in Australia than it is now, where, you know, it's taken a collective effort to address a common purpose to overcome COVID-19, and the figures are really quite impressive now in terms of new cases every day in comparison to other countries globally. So that's a great example that's very contemporary about what can be achieved when people are aligned through a common purpose where there's societal impact. So contributing to society and creating meaningful work are two top priorities according to McKinsey in their survey of employees. And yet they're just in about 21% and 11% of purpose statements. So again, an opportunity to think about your company and how it aligns with those societal and global impacts. And you might not do a product that instantly you might think has a global impact, but I was reading a report about a company that makes tires, and you know, you can think of it in terms of, do you make good tires? Or you can think of it in terms of, do your tires ensure that people get home safely to their families every day? So you can see that by framing it in the context of an impact in the society, it can give discretional effort. So KPMG did a study as well, and they also found this key factor of connecting people to purpose. So the top bars are turquoise, and they show what happens when leaders communicate purpose and connect the work and the process and the product to a positive societal impact. And the grey bars underneath are employees whose leaders do not communicate purpose. So you can see there's at least 30% difference between those bars in terms of what people feel about, you know, their work. Is it just a job, or is it something that they feel proud of? And as I say, when people are connected to a purpose, they're more inspired and encouraged to strive for continuous improvement. They're more likely to think that the place is a great place to work and feel proud to work there. And they rarely think about leaving and looking for another job. So this isn't just a nice to have. This is about, you know, getting the best out of your employees, making sure that people are collaborative, innovative, and you retain them within your organisation. And that all of that will impact on your bottom line in your company as well. So how do we address that purpose gap? It's worthwhile engaging your stakeholders, so your employees, your customers, your shareholders. It's worthwhile understanding what their sense of purpose is and what resonates clearly with them. You can do surveys to do that and find out that information. And then think about your superpower. And we looked earlier at that slide on, you know, a gin distillery turning their product into the production into hand sanitizers to create safety and security in society. So they use their superpower of alcohol in their production line to create a superpower that connected people and purpose. And then also measure what you can do to make informed decisions. So there might be a range of processes that you have. If you look at the energy consumption if you look at the extent to which your products are recyclable, and if you looked at the society impact. So think about the parameters that are meaningful that you could measure. Because often, you know, if you do make improvements on those process steps, then it actually benefits the company, because if you use less energy, it's more likely to be efficient and cost effective as well. I do quite like Simon Sinek, and he says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And one of his examples in starting out with why was, if you look at the marketing of Dell computers, for example, he said that Dell will start off by saying, we make great computers. Whereas, and sure, I'm sure they do, but Apple, if you look at the images on Apple marketing at the moment, it's all about how their products connect people during physical distancing, and it's always images of people and connecting with families. So it's like, well, I need an Apple device in order that I can connect with people. So start with why, is the suggestion. So this is my last section. There's just a few more slides, and I see we're sort of running close to time now in the last few minutes. So this is my reminder that you can't pour from an empty cup, and people say sometimes that we're in a bit of a marathon rather than a sprint right now. So okay, I know there's people out there that you'll be working around the clock to try and maintain a business during these times, but if you can't pour from an empty cup, so if you don't look after yourself, it's just not going to be sustainable, and fatigue and burnout could be a real risk. So this is my nurturing self-care section at the end, just as a reminder. So eat, play and sleep. Now, I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs here, but I remember a couple of years ago, my husband experienced burnout, and these were 3 areas that by practicing these 3 things, it actually made a huge difference. He was starting out a business, and there was a few things that happened during the year before that, and it all culminated. But by looking after himself and good self-care and good support, he's been back on his tracks, and he's been learning and growing ever since. So it's a good news story. So that's why I wanted to share it with you. So by eating well, I mentioned at the beginning that our brains are working really hard at the moment. We're problem solving, we're analysing, we're navigating an uncharted territory. So eating well helps provide good brain fuel. It also improves our immune system, which is important at this time. So the middle section is a reminder to exercise well. And when we exercise well, it actually improves our endorphin release, which is our sort of happy hormones, if you like. Also, our brains function better. So for the first hour after exercise, we're more likely to be able to think and problem solve. So, and I think it might help us get rid of, if anybody else is like me, sort of started to collect a few extra calories around the waistline. So important to balance our eating and consumption with some exercise to burn those calories off. So sleeping is critical as well at this time, and if you can aim for above 7 hours a night, that's great. Lots of things happen during your sleep in terms of, if we learn new stuff during the day, that often replays in our brains at night. So it's part of our learning process. Also, during our REM sleep often helps us prioritize things that are problems for us. So, and the deep sleep is a nurturing sleep. And so if we get good sleep, we're more likely to be resilient and sustainable. So not all of us will be getting up an hour early and doing yoga sessions and meditation sessions. So what I wanted to share with you is an opportunity that hopefully all of us do through multiple times during the day, and that's the hand washing. So we're advised that hand washing is about 20 seconds. So what you can do is actually use that time as a moment to press pause on panic. So it's an opportunity to do mindfulness. And what I'd suggest is that 20 seconds, you can actually do some breathing exercises. So if you do something called square breathing, that's breathing in for 5, pausing for 5, breathing out for 5, and pausing for 5, then that actually reduces your heart rate, it reduces your blood pressure, and it allows you just to clear your brain and stop And if you do that several times during the day, you probably find you're less exhausted at the end of the day. So this is about looking at everyday opportunities to build some mindfulness during the day, just to help you feel less fatigued and burnt out. So this is my last slide, and it's about rebuilding resilience through gratitude. Excuse me. So again, as I mentioned, a couple of years ago, my husband wasn't working, which meant that there was less that we could do in terms of holidays or eating out at restaurants or buying new things. Now, if we'd just focused on that, we could have been in a bit of a dark place. But what we did instead was, after watching an inspiring presentation by Hugh van Kulenberg at my son's primary school, we implemented a practice of gratitude at meal times. So what this meant was that we went around the table, we asked each person, what are you grateful for today? And it was amazing how it really helped us focus on what was right, rather than focusing on what we didn't have. And so, you know, on a difficult day, my husband might say, well, I've got 2 arms, 2 legs and a pulse. And, you know, if that's all you can think of in a day, well, at least, you know, this is the day that we've got, when some people might be less fortunate. But my son also impressed me. He's now 12. And he'd talk about, I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful that we live a mile away from the beach. I'm grateful for, we have a nice home, and it's a place where we feel safe and secure. And grateful for the support of parents and things like that. So it was actually pretty awesome in terms of reflecting on things that actually really matter, as opposed to the materialistic things. And again, this isn't just a pink and fluffy thing. There is neuroscience that actually supports this, that if you focus on gratitude for around 28 days, your brain actually starts to develop neural pathways that look for the positives. So we know that we're good at looking for risks and threats, but this actually builds compensatory mechanisms in our brain where we can start feeling positive and grateful and resilient about the things that we do have. So that's my last slide, and I see we're coming up to time now. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much for listening. My details are here, so my email address. If you do have questions about anything that I've presented here today, please feel free to drop me an email. I've got a website as well, which tells you a little bit more about how I work with people to look at leadership and highly effective teams and wellbeing and self-care. And feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I do post from time to time articles on health, wellbeing, resilience, and so forth. So thank you for listening. And I'm now going to stop the share and see if I can look at any questions from people. So let's scroll down. Somebody said, sorry, I had to leave the meeting at 11:40. So that's a few minutes ago. Are there any more questions from people about anything that I've asked, or does it resonate with you? I notice we've only got a small number of people, so please feel free to unmute yourself and join in a conversation and ask questions. Okay, so I'm not hearing from anyone. Are there any, if anybody wants to raise a hand, say anything, maybe even tell me a little bit about your business and what field you're in, whether that was helpful. Okay, not hearing from anybody at the moment. Ida, I'm just wondering whether you have access to chats that's not visible.
Okay, so we've just had Fabiola just drop a thank you, that it was a great, that it was a good webinar. So thank you for that.
I can see that on. So any more questions? So I think we're just right on time. I think you said about sort of 40, 45 minutes, didn't you?
That's about right. So firstly, thank you for that fantastic presentation. As you mentioned before, if anyone does have any questions, they can email Helen at helen@helenlowry.com.au. I will include that email address as part of the email I will send out to everyone tomorrow, which will have a copy of the recording along with the PowerPoint presentation.
Is there any feedback form? That's always helpful if people have got comments and suggestions. Whenever I present to a new audience, it's always good to know what's hit the mark or what's not hit the mark. It's an opportunity for me to learn and grow from this. So if you feel that there are any comments or suggestions about the presentation, again, whether or not there's a feedback form, it's always great to hear from you and hear if there's any suggestions about the presentation.
Yep, so over the next couple of days, I'll do a little bit of a ring around. I'll speak to some of the members and I'll collate some feedback for you, and I'll be able to share that with you.
Sure.
So I think we're done with the questions. Nothing else has come through. I can see some of the participants are dropping off now. So I think we'll wrap it up. So look, on behalf of Helen and APPA, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great afternoon, and thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks a lot, Ida. You take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.